Acting like building leaders all around the world. Let us keep our dreams alive. Cause tomorrow's gonna be a better day.
Hello everyone, welcome back to our podcast. I'm your host Nabila Abbas, and today we will continue our critical discussion on the ongoing war in Lebanon. In part of this series, we are joined by our special guest, a Lebanese expert in peace and conflict studies and humanitarian crisis, who will help us unpack the complex political and military dimensions of this conflict, from the roles of Hezbollah and Hamas to Israel's military strategies, the legality of war under international law, and the UN stance. We will be diving deep into questions that are shaping Lebanon's future. Stay with us for this eye opening conversation. So, I would like to invite my honorable guest, Christelle Barakat. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Of course. Thank you so much, Nabila. Hello, everyone. My name is Christelle. I come from Lebanon. I currently work as a researcher at the Lebanese Center for Policy Studies, which is an independent public policy think tank here in Lebanon. So we focus on public policies in Lebanon and in the wider Middle East and North Africa region. And my background is in peace and conflict studies with a concentration on international peace development, as well as political science and international affairs, legal studies, gender studies, disarmament, migration, among other topics of interest. I am very happy to be here today, and I look forward to our conversation. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. We are glad to have you today, and we believe that in Tactile Youth Network podcast series, it is important to invite our genuine young speakers who are the true ambassadors of their country. And of course, it is a fact checking as well, because you are the real ambassadors and representative, and you should be given equal opportunity to speak and that voice which actually matters. So before I ask a very serious question, like the audience just want to know what is happening in Lebanon at the moment. If you can put some, light on the current situation of Lebanon in a very brief way, the statistics, the casualties maybe, and like where is the war right now in Lebanon?
Of course. Thank you so much for your question. So as everyone would expect, especially if they are following the news, things are going from bad to worse, unfortunately. So the bombing is still ongoing in a majority of the Lebanese territory. So it's not just restricted to the south or to the Bekaa. There's a high level of uncertainty where nowhere is genuinely safe. There are cars that are being targeted and bombed on the roads. There are entire villages that are being asked or where people are being asked to evacuate. And then they are being bombed as well. We have reached hundreds of thousands of people who have been displaced from their homes and who have taken refuge either in public schools or in other available apartments, either that were donated by individuals or where they have to pay rent. And a lot of people are unfortunately also on the streets where they have put up tents. And this is very alarming considering that winter is really upon us. So one starts to think, also about the impact that might have on people who have been internally displaced. As we know, this is also impacting education, not only for children who are from regions that are being bombed, but also those who are being displaced. And also since a lot of displaced individuals are in public schools, then obviously these schools cannot restart. And the situation is very complex on multiple levels, as one can imagine. So unfortunately, it's very bleak. There aren't really any signs of it de-escalating anytime soon, although there are always continuous dialogues and meetings happening, mostly behind closed doors among political leaders, religious leaders, foreign dignitaries, to try to pave the way towards a ceasefire.
This is totally devastating, of course. And I believe like the rest of the world is of course watching all these, graphics and videos coming on social media as well. And I think it is no more hidden. And today your presence is also important because in this episode, of course, our audience will learn more about Lebanon situation and how better we can help each other. And I would like to remind my audience that we already had done the part one on Lebanon. You can listen that episode as well. But in this episode today, it is very important because we are talking more about law and the escalating groups as well as the Israel's military, clever strategies and tactics uh, to break the humanitarian rules as well. So to begin with that, I would like to ask one serious question. Could you provide us with an overview of Hezbollah's and Hamas roles in this conflict? What historical factors have led to their current involvement, and how are they influencing the dynamics on ground? Because I just want to quote a reference like Hezbollah has played a major role in Lebanese politics and military defense against Israel since the 1980s with Iranian support. You can fact check us as well during your conversation. So, yes, to you, Christelle.
Thank you again, Nabila, first of all, for having me. And again, as you mentioned, for the importance of this dialogue that we're having today. So first, I would like to note that, as we all know, new developments will have taken place by the time this podcast episode is out. So I will do my best, to answer as much as I can to your questions based on all of the developments up till now. Secondly, of course, I am speaking today in a personal capacity and representing my own research around these topics. So to begin with, it's important, I guess, to understand the different ways in which Hezbollah is perceived in Lebanon. So, generally speaking, there are three main perceptions. So the first one is Hezbollah being seen as a political party that has, seats in the parliament, that has a couple of ministers within the cabinet. Secondly, is the perception as a militant group or terrorist organization that is under international sanctions. And then thirdly, several individuals, especially in the South, do perceive it as a savior of sorts for the South throughout the past couple of decades. So as you mentioned, Hezbollah has existed in Lebanon since 1982. It was created during the Lebanese Civil War as a resistance group to Israel's invasion of Lebanon, which dates back to the same time period. Hezbollah has ties with Iran and is backed by it. It represents Shiite interests in Lebanon and the region. It has resisted Israeli attacks on Lebanon in 2000 and 2006 as well. Hamas is based in the Gaza Strip, where it engages in armed resistance against Israel. It's also an Islamist organization and is likewise perceived as a terrorist organization by numerous countries. So delving into the current conflict, on October 7, 2023, Hamas launched an attack on Israel. This led to casualties and the taking of hostages. Israel retaliated and escalated the conflict. Israel's attack was disproportional to the attack launched by Hamas, even if it considers it to be proportional. Hezbollah stated its support for Hamas after these attacks as part of the wider Palestinian cause and resistance against Israeli occupation. Hezbollah being located in Lebanon and supporting retaliatory strikes against Israel led to a widening of the conflict into Lebanon. So regarding your question concerning historical factors, as we know, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict goes back or dates back to 7 decades ago. It's an intractable conflict that is difficult to resolve. Israelis believe that they have the right to settle in the land because it was God-given or God-promised to them, whereas Palestinians were ousted from their lands and homes, being confined to the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, where they live under harsh circumstances. We all have a duty to do our own research in this regard. It's a very long conflict. It's very complicated. It's even older than you and I. So in a sense, even us, we are trying our best to still understand it and understand its roots and causes and evolution. So turning to Lebanon, there have been 4 key moments in history tied to Israel and Hezbollah. So 1982, which, as we mentioned, was when Hezbollah was formed to resist Israel's attempts to invade Lebanon. 2000, which is when Israel withdrew from the security zone it had created in South Lebanon and Hezbollah launched attacks against Israel. 2006, when a war broke out between Hezbollah and Israel. This was prompted by Hezbollah's July cross-border raid in Israel. Israel bombed several bridges and locations across Lebanon. The war lasted for approximately 1 month. Tensions remained in its aftermath, though. The United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701 was passed in August of that year. And this is very important because it's a resolution that keeps being brought up even in this conflict that many consider to be, part of the solution, or its implementation is regarded as being the solution, for the potential resolution of the conflict or as an accompaniment to a potential ceasefire. So this was a ceasefire resolution that led to the deployment of blue helmets or UN peacekeeping forces in the south of Lebanon. It simultaneously had as a goal the disarmament of Hezbollah. It was framed in the context of bringing sustainable peace to the region. We finally have the present or current day happenings, which everyone, as you said, is watching unfold on TV screens, on social media, and so on and so forth. So Hezbollah has been responding to Israeli actions in Syria and Palestine, condemning the airstrikes and bombings, notably of civilian infrastructures such as hospitals, and contributing to Palestinian resistance.
Thank you very much, Christelle, for such a detailed historical and political background of these two groups. And I'm very sure that our audience must have this, accurate information that is coming from you and with some of other resources and references quoted. So here's a quick follow-up question if you would like to answer this. Are these groups primarily seen as defenders of Lebanon, or is their involvement viewed as escalating tensions and instability within the region? We just wanted to know what is the perspective of you regarding this question?
Mm-hmm. So that's a great follow-up question, actually. So as we previously stated, there are varying perceptions regarding Hezbollah in Lebanon. So most individuals in Lebanon have a perception or opinion regarding Hezbollah, not so much regarding Hamas. It's important to understand that the history books that are used in Lebanese schools stop at around 1975, which is even before the Civil War. This means that newer generations since then are not aware about the Civil War and its details, nor about the different conflicts between Israel and Hezbollah. Now, allow me to reiterate the three varying perceptions that exist around Hezbollah in Lebanon. So Hezbollah, again, is seen as being either a political party, a militant group or terrorist organization under international sanctions, and a savior for the South. In the context of this conflict, there are three perspectives as well. The first one being many individuals agree with Hezbollah's resistance to Israel, especially in light of Israel's targeting of civilian structures. These individuals who ascribe to this perception or view believe that Hezbollah is preventing Israel from widening its attacks in the region and from occupying Lebanon. Now, the second perspective is that many individuals oppose Hezbollah's actions as they believe that this is a war that the Lebanese people were dragged into, even though the government of Lebanon itself has not been officially fighting Israel. And the third perception or perspective is that many individuals adopt a humanitarian approach and do not want to get into a debate about who is right and who is wrong. So they just want an end to humanitarian suffering on all sides, because we have all seen what has been going on in Gaza and in Lebanon and in Israel, how many innocent lives have been impacted, particularly when it comes to children and women, the bombing of residential buildings, hospitals, schools, and so on and so forth. I personally think that each of us needs to do their own research. That said, one point that I do want to make clear to everyone listening to us today is that there are no winners in war. There's only loss and pain.
Yeah, that is great to quote here. Like, of course, there is no winners in the war because we can see a lot of loss has already been, reduced because of this war and this conflict and escalation. And thank you very much for sharing with us some of the different perspectives of different groups of youth on the controversial role of these two groups in Lebanon. And at the end, of course, it is important to highlight that the people of the Lebanon at least needs peace. and they want to see it like ending very soon. And of course, let us just move further, talking more about law in the war. So, in this section of Israel's military tactics and legal implications, I would like to ask you, Israel has been using advanced military tactics, including bombardments, drone strikes, and targeted attacks from a legal perspective. How do these tactics stand under international humanitarian law and the laws of war? For my audience, that why we are talking about law in a war, I just want to quote here a reference. According to the uh, Geneva Conventions, there are specific rules about the conduct of war, including the protection of civilians and the proportionality of military force. It is documented in the UN laws of war. So, because your background is also in law and humanitarian crisis, and you have also been studying in conflict studies as well. So, how you would like to, respond to this question?
You are absolutely right in that there are specific rules about the conduct of war, specifically when it comes to the protection of civilians and the proportionality of military force. So to start off, international humanitarian law and jus in bello, or the law in war, were created decades ago to serve as legal principles governing the actions of parties or sides to a conflict during war. They focus on distinction between combatants and non-combatants. They focus on proportionality, and they focus on the prohibition of certain weapons. So law in war is part of international humanitarian law. Their legal norms should apply to all conflicting parties, notably as they strive to limit the humanitarian impacts of armed conflict. Israel has breached international law in several cases during the ongoing conflict. Firstly, by targeting civilian infrastructures or dual-use objects in Gaza and in Lebanon. To explain, civilian infrastructures are those used by civilians mainly. Dual-use objects are structures that may be used by combatants, but that are also used by civilians. So here I want the audience to think of hospitals and schools as well as residential buildings. Secondly, and related to targeting non-combatants and civilians or dual-use objects, the fundamental principle of proportionality has not been respected due to Israel's use of disproportionate force in responding to attacks. Thirdly, Israel has limited the access of humanitarian aid to Gaza and has even targeted humanitarian workers, either delivering aid or assisting the wounded. In Lebanon, Israeli attacks have targeted and harmed the press personnel reporting on the conflict, Red Cross convoys, and UNIFIL personnel. So UNIFIL personnel, again, being the blue helmets that are in charge, according to Resolution 1701 of peacekeeping. Fourthly, Israel has used a class of prohibited weapons, including phosphorus bombs and depleted uranium bombs, of which the long-term impacts are still unclear. These substances can cause severe burns, increase pollution and toxic gases in the air, and are indiscriminate in nature. We must not forget the electronic devices attacked by Israel, in which thousands of pagers and hundreds of walkie-talkies exploded across Lebanon. These led to death and thousands of casualties, with impacted individuals losing limbs and their eyesight. The Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons and its fourth protocol prohibit the use of lasers, for example, that lead to permanent blindness. So in this case, we can maybe liken, the pagers and walkie-talkies to that element, since they did lead to blindness in a lot of cases. So distinction and proportionality were not necessarily applied in this case. The excessive suffering also counters international humanitarian law.
Thank you very much for being courageous to share all these facts and figures. And of course, it is very much clear through some of the graphics and videos as well that Israel's army and military is really using some of the unlawful, elements during this war. And as you have mentioned about some of the elements and some of the explosions which has already been happened in the past few months, can you provide insight into whether Israel's action in Lebanon are being scrutinized for potential violations of this law. How does this apply to Hezbollah's actions as well?
So this is really an ongoing process that we are, discovering facts about as the days go on. What we do know for now is the following. So we know that the Lebanon's Atomic Energy Commission has been investigating the use of weapons containing depleted uranium, including phosphorus bombs. We also know that many researchers and experts have also been investigating actions from various angles, including legal and technical perspectives. So here, these may be independent researchers and experts, or they may be tied to think tanks and research centers. We also have several non-governmental and international organizations, particularly those working on human rights, who are also monitoring the situation and reporting on violations. Nationally or at a national level, political parties have been holding bilateral and multilateral meetings to discuss these matters behind closed doors. Internationally or at an international level, several countries have attempted to mediate the conflict and to halt escalation. So we know that there have been Security Council meetings held regarding Lebanon, with the United Nations Security Council offering unanimous support to UNIFIL peacekeepers and UNIFIL in carrying out its mandate. The conflict has also been mentioned during the General Assembly's first committee, which handles disarmament-related matters. The United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, has condemned the exchanges of fire, notably at the southern border, noting their expanding scope, depth, and intensity. He has also appealed conflicting sides to respect Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The need to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure was further reaffirmed. Overall, what we can see or say about the UN level is that the messaging has been focused on stopping the killing and the destruction. It has been stressed the humanitarian aspects, scrutinizing violations on all sides of the conflict.
Yeah, of course. Like we have seen on the social media as well, like different pages of United Nations departments are, openly condemning what is happening in Lebanon, of course, and condemning the Israel's brutality as well. But at some point, UN is always under criticism as well. Like my next question is, the United Nations has addressed this situation several times, but the language they use to describe it, conflict versus war, varies legally and politically. How is this distinction important? What does it mean for Lebanon, Israel, and the international community? The accurate use of some of the terminologies, because most of the time we have seen this anxious aggression in the people of Lebanon as well as Palestine as well when someone says it is a conflict, because most of the time Palestinian as well as Lebanese people say they are being dragged into this, conflict or war, and they are not fighting with anyone. And other than this, it is a genocide which is clearly happening by the Israel's military.
And that's a great question. And it gives us the space to really delve into a reflection about what is conflict, what is war, and then obviously the UN's use of the different terms. So scaling back things a little bit, in my interventions today, I have probably used the words conflict and war interchangeably. So this is not necessarily wrong. And here it's important to define both terms. So conflict means or signals a disagreement or clash between two or more parties. Conflicts can be multi-leveled and can be social, economic, political, and so on in nature. They can be violent or non-violent, and they can include negotiations as well as dissent without necessarily leading to further escalation. A conflict can escalate into a war, though. As for war, it's a form of violent conflict between countries or groups. It involves destruction, casualties, and humanitarian crises. War should be governed by protocols that are both military and legal in nature. International humanitarian law, for example, about which we talked about a little bit ago, is applied during war. All wars are conflicts. As such, legally and politically, we have international humanitarian law, which includes the Geneva Conventions and their protocols regarding the humane treatment of individuals at times of war. We also have the Hague Conventions revolving around hostilities and protecting cultural property and heritage. There's also customary international law that has developed through practice. So while it is unwritten, it's widely accepted and legally binding. An example of customary international law is the non-use of torture and distinguishing between combatants and non-combatants. We also have international criminal law, which applies to individuals who violate international humanitarian law by committing war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. Arms-related treaties and resolutions likewise apply. On an additional note regarding terminology, framing the conflict as a war can increase military aid and intervention. Framing it as a humanitarian crisis can lead to faster humanitarian aid. Public perceptions and policy recommendations are further impacted by the choice of the terminology that is used. So the use of these terms by different actors, such as the media, the government, international organizations, and so on, also carries weight when it comes to escalating or de-escalating tensions and framing dialogue and ceasefire attempts. Now, circling back to the UN and its choice of terminology, at the end of the day, we must remember that the UN is an intergovernmental body, meaning that the UN cannot have opinions like individuals can or advocacy groups can. It can focus on humanitarian angles and messaging, but it strives to remain a forum for intergovernmental dialogue or dialogue between different governments or different member states. A certain degree of impartiality or multipartiality is implied and applied. In-depth research and findings guide the development of UN reports, statements, and recommendations. UN Security Council resolutions are binding.
Thank you very much for such a very clear idea about conflict, war, and some of the use of other terminologies, and explaining very mannerfully about the role of UN during such crisis and how they respond and how they address some of the issues. And you were very right when you said that, like, UN is an government body, not the individual youth advocacy group. And of course, like, individuals have more freedom than than some other groups. For example, UN, of course, like, individuals can have an open remarks, opinion about such issues. And many people, either in West, East, Europe, I'm glad that people are taking stand and they know what is right and what is wrong. We have been seeing very massive campaigns on social media. We have been witnessing people supporting people of Lebanon, and they are showing their sympathy, their support. And I think this is what we need as a human, and this is what actually the humanity is. So we would also remind our audience that through these episodes, I hope you would be very much clear about that what is happening in Lebanon and what is the perspective of youth during these current crises and what help they are seeking from you. And you can also be the ambassador for such countries to spread your support around the world, across the world. So let us continue our conversation, as we already have discussed about the role of Hezbollah and different perspectives of youth groups about Hezbollah. We have seen one of the heroic, death of Yahya Sinwar. If you want to comment on this, people were supporting Yahya Sinwar. They just come out of their homes, they just raise the flags, and also that stick is now famous in Lebanon, I believe. How you would like to respond to this? Like, do you see these people are the real hero of your community? And if yes, what lessons they have taught youth, and how youth are, trying to perceive these lessons in their community for the future?
Do you please repeat the question, Nabila? I'm very sorry, the connection cut off.
Oh, it's all right. It's all right. I was just asking that we already have discussed a bit about different perspectives of youth on Hezbollah's and Hamas' role in Lebanon and in this conflict as well. So I just wanted to know that there was a very heroic moment when Yahya Sinwar was killed by the Israeli forces, military. But we have seen that massive people have come out of their homes and they have shown honor to Yahya Sinwar, and even the last stick which he was using as a resistance is now famous in Lebanon, and it is taking over the social media as well. As a youth, personally, yourself, how do you see these heroes and what lessons we can take from them and like how people see them?
That's a very interesting question to consider. Um, I think that people in Lebanon are trying to show their resilience and their resistance in whichever ways that they can. Of course, a lot of the events that have happened over the years in Lebanon, from the multiple crises that have been overlapping, have really impacted people's resistance and resilience and have tested them. Although Lebanese people remain strong and steadfast in, resisting occupation and really expressing themselves both in person and online against war crimes that have been taking place, especially the targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructures. And they have been really trying in whichever ways they can to get the word out about what's happening in Lebanon and to keep it relevant in the news. And that takes a lot of courage, and that takes a lot of persistence, and that takes a lot of ingenuity and creativity. At a time of pain and destruction, it's very humbling to see so many people doing their best to really try to spread hope and to keep the message also in a way more on the humanitarian front, focused on ending the war and on also seeking a better future for Lebanon, but also for everyone that is in Gaza and the West Bank.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, looking ahead, the future of Lebanon, peace, conflict, or prolonged war. Given the regional and international factors involved, such as Iran's support for Hezbollah and the US backing of Israel, what do you foresee for Lebanon? Is there any hope for de escalation, or are we looking at a prolonged conflict?
So far, even international actors have been wary of the current conflict turning into a full-scale war because they are aware of the consequences. And it's a very real reality that it might evolve into a third world war if it were to spiral out of control. We should strive to look at other countries' efforts as well when answering this question. France, for example, has been heavily engaged in diplomatic efforts with various Lebanese political parties, urging for a ceasefire and for the election of a Lebanese president. The same for Qatar. Iran has been retaliating in response to attacks on its consulate in Syria and to counter Israeli attacks launched on Iranian territory. Even then, Iran's response has been limited and continues to show restraint. Hezbollah throughout the conflict has largely focused on targeting military infrastructure. We also know that the UK has stopped some aspects of its arms trade with Israel due to concerns over the misuse of arms to commit war crimes. There is political will for a ceasefire, but more diplomacy and more political will are needed. There's always hope and work towards the escalation, even if this might turn into a prolonged conflict. So both of these elements can coexist in a sense.
Yeah, that is obvious. That is obvious. Like things are still, uncertain, and maybe it can turn into a larger proxy war, or maybe we can also hope for a peace as well in the end. And thank you very much for mentioning a few of the diplomatic involvements as well, like Qatar and France you have just mentioned. And we also hope so, like the other countries' authoritative bodies should also jump into some good policy making and some good decisions about Lebanon as well, because everyone's involvement at the moment is very important unless we want peace and prosperity for Lebanon. So let us a little bit talk more about some of the other Israel's brutality and legal and ethical concerns. Many accuse Israel of excessive brutality in its military campaigns, with accusations ranging from disproportionate force to targeting civilian infrastructure. From a legal and ethical perspective, how valid are these claims and what mechanism exists to hold Israel accountable? Because now we are seeing even Israel is attacking very crowded and populated cities and even hospitals. It looks like they don't even care that these are heavily populated areas and many civilians can be, dead because of these unlawful practices.
That is very true. And I guess another alarming point that people are turning their attention to nowadays is the attacks on landmarks that have historical and cultural significance. So this is on a side note. But going back to your main questions, this goes back to the second question of our interview. So Israel has used excessive brutality and has breached international law. This is a fact. It's not. It is not discriminating between combatants and non-combatants. It is not being proportional in its response attacks, and it is using prohibited types of bombs. Legally, the claims are valid if compared against international law. Ethically, they are valid as well. As for mechanisms to hold Israel accountable, I do not believe the UN Security Council will pass a resolution against Israel due to the veto power that its permanent members have, notably the United States. The International Criminal Court should be able to prosecute individuals accused of committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide. Israel is not a member of the International Criminal Court, but the International Criminal Court, or for short, ICC, has stated jurisdiction over events that have happened in Palestine. So enforcing any International Criminal Court ruling is another matter, though, as it requires cooperation from states. As for the International Court of Justice, it gives more of an advisory opinion regarding the legality of certain questions brought in front of it by the UN, other international organizations, or other countries. It cannot prosecute Israel or Israeli officials, though, for example. Human rights bodies could investigate violations and make recommendations, but they are unable to prosecute these potential crimes.
Yeah, that makes sense. And thank you very much for, giving a very brief information about the international court as well. And there are some of the limitations. And yeah, of course, everything has some of the procedures and some of the rules to follow and a process to trust. We hope so that the world is watching the brutality of Israel, and they have, I believe, they have crossed the limitation during the war as well, and they have been practicing unlawful, elements during this war. So the world is watching. The graphics, the videos are the evidence of it. But now let us see how the international authoritative bodies can unite together and can respond to this, and when they can process things into a practical term as well. So again, we hope a peace and prosperity for the Lebanon, because every individual in Lebanon has the right to see their country, progressing and prosper and to live a very peaceful life. And for that, together as a young people, as an ambassadors from different countries, as in different representatives, we also have responsibility to extend our sympathy, not only sympathy, but a practical, stand with the people of Lebanon. And as much as we can, we have to spread the accurate information, because the fact checking is very important. This is a very high critical moment where misinformation can ruin single effort as well. So the fact checking is very important, and try to speak with, genuine and original people from Lebanon, because they are the true people who know the true facts and figures. And that is why today our speaker has been sharing with us a lot of information regarding law and humanitarian crisis and other, informative things about conflict and war, like how we can differentiate among these two terms as well, and the use of other terminologies. Once again, Christelle, thank you very much for becoming part of this episode and taking out your courage to speak about these facts and figures. I just want to know, what is your final message you would like to send to the international community regarding Lebanon's situation? What do you think the world needs to do, legally or politically, to support peace and stability in the region?
Thank you for giving me this platform and this opportunity once again. I guess a couple of very quick messages or thoughts that I have regarding this question are, do not forget about us. So when talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, remember what is happening in Lebanon. I fear that if the conflict prolongs, reporting on it would decrease and the world would enter a state of inertia and amnesia. This must not be the new normal. World leaders must keep calling and working towards a ceasefire and go beyond it to reinforce the implementation of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701, which we talked about earlier. Political will is more needed than ever, as well as prudence and diplomacy. Deterrence nowadays is being pushed to its limits. This conflict is not just about Israel, Palestine, and Lebanon. Its risks and perils could impact the world as we know it. As for the world and what it needs to do, I urge each individual to do their own research and to better understand what is happening. Please, please, please make sure that you consult credible sources and that you diversify your news sources. Also, please find ways of making your own impact. This could be by contacting your political representatives or volunteering online with a human rights organization or donating for humanitarian relief or signing a petition. Making your own impact can really take many shapes and forms.
Yeah, thank you very much for highlighting one of these important things, that how we can volunteer individually, as well as the second one is very important. You just have mentioned, that is how we can contact our political leaders and how we can come a way to raise awareness and to push them for a real action as well. Because as a citizen, as an individual of any country, people have this power and they can change the world as well. Thank you very much, Christelle Barakat, for such a very insightful discussion. And thank you to our audience as well. And please try to spread this episode in your circle as much as you can. Even you can send this episode to your political leader if you have any contact, so that they can also listen the real voices which are coming from Lebanon. And of course, their voices does matter, because they are the future of this world. They are not only the present, but also the future as well. And their equal political, social, and economic participation in this world is very important. And that will be only possible if they have a prosper and peaceful country, just like the other people are living in their country as a citizen. Thank you once again to our guest for this deep and insightful discussion on the complexities of Lebanon's current situation. It is clear that the issues go beyond immediate violence and require a broader understanding of legal, political, and military dynamics. We hope today's episode sheds light on these critical questions and encourages our listeners to stay informed and engaged with Lebanon's ongoing struggle. This is your host, Nabila Abbas. I'm signing off for today. See you in another next episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you.